It's Tata's Tuesday, and we are looking at this admittedly kind of clickbaity article from this week on CNN. Ignore the clickbaity headline article because the last part of this article on female police officers is really quite interesting, and let's just ignore that. They like typical news. This is like news story 101. You have to have the personal. So here's the story of this woman who talked a guy down on a bus and nobody could think she would do it, but she managed to resolve the situation peacefully. And okay, that's your news story. So you can actually get into the issue you want to talk about. Like I said, journalism 101. Here is the macro story. There's a, conference of female law enforcement leaders. And so they talk about those issues. So now you have your quotes for the whole thing. And this part of the article is a lot of statistics and sweeping generalizations that I'm not totally convinced of, because I don't think that men and women are so that fangled different that it's such a huge. I mean, the article says for itself that there are like 13% of the overall police force is female, and then they say there's less brutality complaints with women. I just don't think the sample is large enough to say that women are less violent or they say that itself, that there was a case last year that a female police officer was charged with excessive force. They say that the majority of police-involved shootings involve men, but since the vast majority of the police force is male, well, that makes sense. The interesting part is when they start talking about how to recruit. And this was the part where I'm like, we're going to talk about this in the context of gaming, because recruitment doesn't just happen. People don't just suddenly show up and say, I suddenly want to do this job. Recruiters target the types of people they want working at the company. And what they found was that the recruitment tactics that people were that the police departments were using, this portrayal of as they call it, run and gun and shoot 'em up. Not only was it kind of attracting the wrong kind of cop, but it also isn't the reality of day-to-day police work. They're pointing out that, police work is a lot of social work. It's first line, front line social work, and more they found as that becomes known, more women have entered policing. In 1971 it says women accounted for just 1.4% of police officers. That's not that long ago. Now it's 13%. Now they say only, but 12% growth, 11% growth, that's, it's going in the right direction. These things do change slowly. And like I said, as long as you see the trend line moving in the right direction, that's what we want to see. A lot of the times these conversations, even on this channel, get bogged down in people accusing each other of supporting quotas and this, that, and the next thing. I'm not doing that. I don't think we really need the article now, so I'm going to show you guys a game called ECHOPLEX. I will probably show more of this tomorrow, but it gives you something more interesting to look at than just this article. Here we are, game, yay. The thing I'm talking about here is not a quota. I'm not looking for perfect 50-50 parity. People get into this silly argument about this all the time. This is not what it is about. This is about trend lines. As long as we see the numbers increasing, even if it's slow, that's positive. Now, we also have to monitor that as the number of women in any field increases, that these salaries don't decline. They have found that when women become more represented in an industry, these salaries go down. Not distraction, moving on. What they have found is a huge issue with women becoming police officers is what it does to their home life. And this is something that is near and dear to my heart because I experience it from the other side. You know, the reason I don't have kids is I don't think, in fact, I know that right now I couldn't balance having children and doing the job I do. I'm pretty tough, but when I get the threats, when I get the people going on Google Earth and finding a picture of my house to try to scare me and things like that, that bothers me a lot less because there's no kids involved. I think I would be a lot more disturbed if I had to worry about people following my kids to school and doing that sort of harassment. And I have no doubt it would happen. It's happened to other gaming professionals. It's happened to other professionals, period, in all industries, politically especially. They target the kids because if they don't get a rise out of you, they go after your spouse and try to get a rise that way. And if that doesn't work, they go after the kids. And some trolls have limits, but others don't because of this strange morality of trolling that because it's all about lulz, they think you should just be able to take whatever they dish out, and that's just not human. But this article talks about the fact, and the line that really got me was, you see the shocking stuff, like these headers, like shunned by male officers, like. They're talking about stuff that happened in 1978, and this is how the mainstream media makes discussions of this so difficult, because this is an issue trapped in amber. I'm sure certain less enlightened police departments, this still goes on, but talking about things that happened in 1971 and 1978 are unhelpful in an article written in 2017, unless it's a historical piece. But, they say it's changing. There's more women in management, and that they say is exceptionally important. And it comes down to how to manage, work-life balance. And this is a struggle for everyone, but it is a uniquely potent struggle for women, and single dads. You can equate this because women are seen by society as having the primary responsibility for childcare, which is why I lump single dads into this, because when, you're the only caregiver for your child, then yeah, absolutely, you are responsible for that child's care. And so, there's this issue, and I thought this was a wonderful case study on this, because this cop went to her chief in Houston, and the chief was a woman, and one of the female officers was a supervisor, worked the evening shift, wanted to switch to day to be home with her child. And the chief made the right call. Somebody else might go, well, I want to be pro-woman, I want to be pro-family, so I'm going to give her the shift. Well, this chief, and I think women are sometimes more empowered to do this than men, she didn't give her the shift because she has to be fair and impartial. And you can't hand out shifts just because someone's a mother and have a small child. But she didn't just leave it there. She didn't say no. She shared with her what she did as a mother of the police force. She got her options. She solved the problem. And that's a good manager. A good manager finds the outcome of something and gets the outcome the employee wants. Not necessarily in the way that the employee wanted it, but the problem got solved. And I thought that was so important, because if you start giving special privileges to particular people based on life circumstances, resentment does build up in the workplace. That's why I'm a big fan of things like personal days and, allowing people just time, a certain amount of time per month, no questions asked. Whether it's I gotta stay home because my kid is sick, or whether I have to take a mental health day, that isn't necessarily something you want to bring up at work. Or, if you want to stay home and play Call of Duty because the new game came out, who cares? I think that's a mental health day, personally. There's a certain amount of, what my mother had, it was 3 personal days. I don't remember if it was a month or every few months or a year, that they weren't the same as sick days, because sick days accrued, personal days didn't. And personal days are no questions asked. Sick days, you have to sort of, if you're out for more than 48 hours, you have to provide a doctor's note. So this is an interesting thing. You can accommodate people with different life things. Because personally, I think that work multiple jobs, and the more money you make, the more I think this is true. Work gets in the way of family, and it shouldn't. It is so important to be a well-rounded person, because you cannot connect to your customer if you don't understand your customer. And so I think it's important for people of all genders to be able to have that family time, parents or not. A lot of us now are in the situation where we've become acutely aware that our parents aren't getting any younger. And I know me, I'm acutely aware that, I have fewer years with my parents ahead of me than are behind me. And I want to make sure I put in the time. So there's no regrets when, they're not around anymore. And that, I think, is valid. And balancing that can be pretty tricky, since, I have to have this content up every day and it takes time. But, the fact that a service as essential as policing is not recognizing that to be a good police officer, you need to maintain that humanity, right? There's a story here that, 10 years ago, they were trying to get 24-hour daycare facilities at the local sheriff's office, but then the recession hit. And so there's been, no money, because policing is funded by tax dollars, and tax dollars take a hit when there's a recession. And, they have it as having 24-hour childcare to help recruit women. I think that's a perk more and more that both men and women are going to be interested in, because I think guys more and more recognize that, or if they don't recognize, they like it, in the future, guys would like to be more involved parents. And the idea that, it's their kid as much as it is their wife's kid once this kid is born and, weaned. And that's when you start thinking about childcare. And so it's not just about recruiting women. It's, hey, if I take this job, my wife who is an architect, or my wife who is a programmer, or whatever, we have childcare. This is not something she has to worry about. This is an option for us that we can use when it is available. I think that is really important, and I'd love to see more of it. This has been an ongoing thing. I mean, when we had employees with kids, it was literally bring your kid to work, we'll hide the porn if somebody got stuck. But we had a flexibility that way. With police, not so much. There are criminals there. There are violent situations. You don't want your kid hanging around the office. I was really fortunate. My mother worked at a university growing up, and back then they allowed kids into the office as long as we were quiet and we didn't get in the way. Now, that exact same university would probably frown on someone doing that exact same thing. And for all their big, leftist word salad virtue signaling, that's a step back than what it was. It's all about professionalism and efficiency. And there's these, soulless HR departments that think it's one size fits all. That thing I talked about yesterday, tyranny of the majority approach. it's actually become less flexible for people with families. And I really think this issue would improve significantly if we stopped looking at it as a women's issue and started looking at it as a family's issue. Now, does this solve the fact that women in many quarters are still treated as the weaker sex? Will this solve the fact that women's issues are not treated as seriously? No, but that's going to take a long time. That is a generational thing that has to just refresh through education. And so I think in the short term, rebranding the whole child care issue as something that affects men and women instead of treating it as women's work. And how do we recruit women? Well, we offer childcare. Well, you would think forward-thinking workplaces wouldn't be thinking in 1960s gender norms paradigms, but they do. But the other thing is when you go home, and they talk about that as well, the mental health impacts. And this, I know because I have friends in law enforcement, this is something that impacts all law enforcement. It is exceptionally difficult to maintain personal relationships when you are in law enforcement. First of all, the job gets to you. But also, the hours are unpredictable and they're long, kind of like game dev. You can't talk about what you see at work, kind of like game dev. But it puts real strain on families. And, I know people who come from families where dad was in law enforcement or granddad was in law enforcement or mom was or something like that. They have a better understanding. These spouses have a better understanding. If someone's coming in from off the street, it's hard. It's the creative cop friend and I talk about this all the time, that what's similar for us is that, creatives fall off the map for various reasons because we got a project or something like that and can't respond to things. Because when you're on set, you can't talk on your phone. And, cops have to do the same thing because, my friend was an undercover for a while as well. So that was even more hardcore. But we sort of understand that. And if he doesn't get back to me right away on something, I don't think anything of it. It's the job. But he has had trouble with relationships because different people have different expectations from spouses, and people think they know what they're getting into, but the not knowing and the worry can really drag on a spouse in ways that are hard to really grasp going in. So the mental health thing is not just for the officer, it's for the whole family. Those support systems are so important. But, and this is the thing I said right at the end, that the quote, and it just this is something that we have to recognize about the uniqueness of the female experience. And this is why I focus on it and try... For those of you that sort of identify as MRAs, I know people do listen to this channel, and I appreciate that. I'm glad you come here and are open to the other side. That's what I'm asking you for with this. Just please keep an open mind on this. The expectations on men and the expectations on women when it comes to the family sphere are different. Sum total, neither is harder than the other. It's not that men have no issues when it comes to family. It's just they manifest in different ways. And the challenge we have had historically, and this is where I came into feminism through the writing tradition, that we have a lot of letters and books and first-person accounts and, recorded tradition of male perspectives, because traditionally there have been a lot more male authors, thinkers, speakers, leaders, just public people than women. we don't have the same understanding of the sort of quiet struggles of women. Now, there are certain aspects of the male experience that kind of come and go. It's not that they don't exist. If you go to sort of the romantic period, there's a ton of writing from an emotional perspective from men. That was the whole idea. These big, giant, overwhelming emotional experiences. You read The Lord of the Rings and those guys are crying all the time, and I'm not saying Lord of the Rings is from the romantic period. It borrows from romantic medievalism in its subject matter, and that was part of it. It was fantasy, and Tolkien's background as a war, I forget what his position was. One of the writers I like was a war medic. The other was something else. I think it was Orwell who was a medic. I could be wrong. But, these guys experience war, and that's very stiff upper lip, and people didn't talk about it. The idea of handling what they called combat trauma back then, not PTS, but it was to get right back out there. So you didn't talk about it. You didn't unpack it. And, we know now that people need more than that, but that's how it was done. And so, hearkening back to this, what they believed was a bygone era where people could be freer with their emotions and men could cry and you didn't have all this stiff upper lip stuff. That was a huge part of the fantasy that informed The Lord of the Rings. And, this idea of male camaraderie and fellowship and all that stuff. But there aren't very many women in The Lord of the Rings. And so, that's just one example of how male storytelling and male literary tradition is just more developed than the female tradition. And that's important in terms of other people being able to understand what people in these roles go through. It helps to build empathy. We have all these support the troops things because there's a lot of stories. Unfortunately, a lot of people think you just give lip service to I support the troops, don't really do it. But this idea of I support housewives, well, nobody thinks you have to do that. There's no, until Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique, it sounded, being a housewife sounded like a very easy life. It sounded idyllic, but what it ended up being is quite isolating and stifling. And we don't have a ton of writing about the female experience, about what not just female professionals go through, but women in general. Because a lot of it is myth intended to sell something. It's not fiction for the sake of fiction. And yes, you could classify Hemingway and the male experience that way too. However, there's just so much writing from men that even though a lot of it is repetitive and very little of it is terribly original, there's enough that is wonderfully original, just because there's so much of it that we have an understanding, we sort of know what's going on, and that impacted the development of psychiatry. A lot of psychiatry was, the original research was only done on men because it was considered inappropriate for male psychiatrists to practice on female patients in that regard. And so we just have this lack of understanding, period, about what is going on with women. Especially things like female police officers, where, they're 13% of the police force. And yes, we see a lot of female police officers on television, but those shows are usually created, produced, and written by men. And yes, that does matter. Somebody can tell a glorious story from a third-person perspective, and then an actress can come in and add a little bit of the feminine to it. That's not the same as a person telling their own story. And it's not that somebody can't tell. It's not. There have been men who have told absolutely glorious stories about women. Various reasons there. It's just, that's good. Let's keep doing that. We just need more stories told about women, by women, about the South. Because it's not that it's better or worse, it's just that it's different. It's a different perspective and it's a different understanding. And then we can take all of it together and look at it and figure out what we have. But we can't do that until we have the data. And this is one of these testimonies that I think is super important. And I'm asking you not to judge it. I'm asking you to just see it as one person's story and try to empathize. This police officer says, it's important that we're transparent and women coming into this profession understand that you have to find a way to balance and still take care of yourself, because you're giving it work, you're giving to your spouse, and then you're giving to your children. You're giving, and you have to find a way to take care of yourself, because when you go down, nobody is replenishing you. So it's important to understand the balance in taking care of yourself mentally and physically and spiritually. And to me, that speaks to the undervalued role of sort of the mother figure. And when you're that mother figure, who's mothering you when you're also going out there and providing financial support for your family? And that's the sort of give and take. And that's why I'm like, I want you to just sort of take this in and not judge and not look for reasons to poke it apart. Too often, because we're all intellectuals, and this is something I had to learn, instead of immediately analyzing, you have to do that take-in process. If you're not actually hearing something, if you're not actually listening to someone because you're not in a position to listen, you miss pieces of your analysis. You know, it's like, imagine it's like a buffer rate. You know, why does everything look like shit on Twitch? Because it just can't process that much. It can't ingest and stream at the same time. Well, people are like that as well. If you're actively chewing on one packet of data, you're missing something else. And that, I think, happens in a lot of these debates, is that people have their talking points and they're emotionally invested in those talking points. That's why they've glomped onto them the way they have. And so they aren't going to let those talking points go without a fight. And so people immediately jump to the what about the men, or not all men, and all this stuff. And the important thing to talk about isn't, you know, the people who have awesome, you know, stay-at-home dad type husbands so they can go out and work. That is not the norm, because that's a stigmatized role as well. And that's why I think, and people are like, well, you're leaving out men. No, I'm not. Because the problem we are collectively facing, men and women together, is that if something is labeled traditionally and ideally masculine, it is given more value. And so women have to defy sex role to be financially successful. But what happened to those men that don't, it isn't natural for them to be these aggressive alpha men? They get left behind too. And that's because traditionally feminine roles in society are treated as less. And that includes the idea of anything creative. Traditionally, men are logical, women are creative, and women are the death of reason. And it's not true, but getting that idea that, you know, the idea that anything about a workforce is a natural occurring phenomenon is foolish. I mean, the natural law or evolution or God, whatever you believe, didn't invent currency. Human beings invented currency. Human beings invented our entire work paradigm. It nothing about it is natural at all. It is all constructed. All our division of labor is constructed. The idea that some work is paid and some work is unpaid, some work is considered important enough to make a lot of money, some isn't, that's all constructed. None of that is natural. None of that is genetic evolution. So we have to take that word natural out of our vocabulary for these discussions, because those guys, and, you know, I feel like I have to stand in solidarity. And this is why I don't just, like some other feminists, just declare, you know, MRA's the enemy, because I think a lot of these guys are that type. those guys that aren't, they don't conform to these masculine ideals. It's not them. It's not natural for them. And they want to believe they matter. And I really believe that the whole men's activist sphere is more about dignity for atypical men than it is anything to do with actual rights. Now, I know you couch it in the language of rights because that's how you get attention. But dignity is very important. Dignity is what informs rights, because rights are rights because they speak to the basic need for humans to have dignity. It's not necessarily just about survival. It's also about, dignity and feeling like a fully recognized human being. And so because we undervalue the feminine, because we undervalue childcare, we give it a lot of lip service. But if we really valued it as a society, we'd give it the same perks as like executive parking and a company car. I'd actually love to see statistics on how many of these Fortune 500 companies offer daycare as a perk. But we have the idea that, everybody talks about a home cooked meal, but do you really appreciate how much work and effort, how much time goes into actually creating that food, which is healthier for you because it's not full of chemicals and, it's fresh? We do not value, we do not cherish these things. We give lip service to it because it's unpaid labor. And, I hear from teachers who are, professors mainly, that millennials won't hand things in unless they're given a mark. Well, many millennials also think that cereal is too much work. They don't want to wash the bowl, so it's a breakfast bar. It's all this very, cynical calculus of what do I immediately get out of this. And I completely understand this is not a moral judgment of millennials, because this is a generation that has more debt coming out of college than ever before and fewer job opportunities. The millennial generation is facing the reality that they may not do as well as their parents. Their quality of life will not be as good. And so I don't want that to sound like a criticism. These millennial characteristics are symptoms of that reality. The millennials just have to hustle harder. And I'm not a millennial. I'm Gen X. That's why I'm talking about this as another. I tend to talk about everything. Like I even talk about women as others or gamers as others because I put on this intellectual hat, observational, emotional distance type thing. But we really have to think about these very important home sphere, like domestic sphere things that, based on the fact that people are cracking up left, right, and center now, appear to be far more important than society has given it credit. And telling a woman to get back in the kitchen and just live a life financially dependent on a man or their parents or whoever else is not the answer. People need independence, because that, more than anything, I really believe that finances are why domestic abuse is so one-sided. Women don't leave bad situations because they're not financially independent. And there's quite a bit of stuff that backs up that theory. It's not that women are inherently more virtuous than men. It's not that women are hormonally incapable of being violent or aggressive or abusive. It's strictly finances. They can't leave because of money. And that gets couched. Women are the gentler sex and all this crap. It's like, where I grew up, girls used to fight other girls all the time. That's a myth. It's a myth. It's roles. It's how you're trained. Boys are encouraged towards aggression. Girls aren't. And it starts so young that we think it's natural. It's not. It's conditioned. individual boys can be more rambunctious or gentler. Individual girls can be more rambunctious or gentler. It really does come down to respecting our own humanity enough that we treat individuals as individuals. And Mother's Day is coming up, and I hope you consider this when you go visit your mother, that the role of mother is one that we all give lip service to, but it's hard. You know, it is by definition all about giving. You know, nobody wants to see their mom cry. That's the end of the world. You know, but mom is supposed to be there. Mom is always supposed to be there. Mom is supposed to be this support system. Well, who's supporting mom? And this is what these women with children that go into important jobs like policing, where they have something to offer. And who's mothering mom? That's the question. Nobody. And so instead of making Mother's Day like one day a year, call up your mom every so often and say, how you doing? Is there anything you need? Give them that little bit. Because it's not natural. It's not its own reward. It's a damn hard job. And we need societally to start appreciating this. That's why I want to see more stories in video games told with mothers as active participants, not dead plot devices. You know, but that's hard because you'd actually have to get in the mind of a mom and crawl around in some stuff that people don't want to think. You know, your mom's smiling on the outside, but she wants to kill you on the inside. And let me tell you, I'm under no illusions. I'm sure I gave my mother, because I was a weird kid. My mother didn't understand me. My mother doesn't understand me to this day, but she tries. I'm sure some days my mother feels like she gave birth to an alien because we're so different. And I imagine that despite myself, you know, she's felt rejected. She's felt hurt, even though there was no intent. But there's no space in the role of mom for that. And so they just eat that and pack it down, and it comes out in bizarre ways that we still don't entirely understand. And I remember it was actually a fight I had with my mother, that she was making excuses for someone who was incredibly abusive. And she just kept saying he's a good person who does bad things. This was not a good person. This was a flat out bad person. It's a person I still to this day consider evil. And I finally got mad at her. I said, Mom, you classifying this person as a good person means you're undervaluing your choice to be better than this person. If they get credit for being good, even though they're not, you're undervaluing yourself. And she never said it again. And it was like that gave her permission to say, yeah, he's a jerk, you know. But I don't think that the role of mom and the unique stuff that comes with that has gotten enough air and light. So if your mom's a cop, if your mom's a nurse, if your mom's a politician, if your mom's a computer programmer, remember that we cherish working moms, but the mom part tends to be how do you do it all? Well, you don't. Something falls by the wayside. Try to think about what that is and give back that thing your mom might be missing. Give back that act of support. Be that shoulder for her. Help her do something that she's always wanted to do. It'll probably mean a lot. So, hope you enjoyed the gameplay. Hope you enjoyed that little bit. Thanks for watching.
Echo breach.